Hello, and welcome to this presentation on developing inclusive classrooms through the implementation of high leverage practices. I am Preeti Sablok, a curriculum resource teacher with the Office of Special Education Instruction. Our presentation today will increase your understanding of specially designed instruction for students with disabilities. You will learn about several high leverage practices that are essential to effective teaching and support the inclusion of students with disabilities, such as systematically designing and scaffolding instruction, adapting curriculum tasks and materials to meet learner needs, providing explicit instruction, actively engaging students in their own learning, and providing positive and corrective feedback. We begin by understanding Fairfax County Public Schools' definition of inclusion. Inclusion embodies the values and practices that support the right of every student, regardless of ability, to access and participate in their school and community. Please take a moment to think about these questions. How are you developing an inclusive culture through your teaching practices? Or what has been your experience with inclusion as a parent or student? When a local screening committee is considering whether specially designed instruction is required for a student with a specific learning disability, the committee considers whether adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction is necessary to address the unique needs of the student and ensures access to the general education curriculum. Specially designed instruction is a service, not a place. It must be provided in the least restrictive environment that meets the needs of students with disabilities. This means students with disabilities will be provided with specially designed instruction in inclusive settings, meaning regular classes, to the maximum extent appropriate. Students with disabilities are legally entitled to specially designed instruction, including intensive interventions, when the intensity of their needs warrants this level of support. The Council for Exceptional Children has developed and published a set of high leverage practices for special educators and teacher candidates. These are 22 practices to support high quality teaching. These high leverage practices will facilitate the implementation of specially designed instruction to meet the needs of students with disabilities. While these practices were designed by the Council of Exceptional Children with students with disabilities in mind, they really are best practices for all students. High leverage practices are a set of practices that are fundamental to support kindergarten through 12th grade student learning, and that can be taught, learned, and implemented by those entering the profession. High leverage practices are organized around four aspects of effective teaching across the range of school settings, including inclusive classrooms. These are instruction, assessment, collaboration, and social emotional behavioral. Our focus today will be primarily on instructional high leverage practices with a portion dedicated to social emotional behavioral practices. All of the instructional high leverage practices focus directly on instructional practice, occur with high frequency, are research based, foster student engagement and learning, are broadly applicable to any content area, and are so important that skillfully executing them is fundamental to effective teaching. There are 12 high leverage practices for instruction. The ones we will focus on today are systematically design and scaffold instruction toward a learning goal, adapt curriculum tasks and materials for specific learning goals, use explicit instruction, use strategies to promote active engagement, and provide positive and corrective feedback. Special educators systematically design and scaffold instruction. Systematically designed instruction is a critical high leverage practice across all tiers of instruction and supports the inclusion of students with disabilities. Tier 1 is core instruction. All students receive instruction and support designed and differentiated in all settings. Tier 2 is more focused, targeted instruction or intervention that supplements core when data indicates that students need it. Tier 3 is most intensive and based on individual student needs. Tier 3 instruction has a narrow focus, is provided in reduced group size, is most explicit and systematic, with most frequent progress monitoring, with daily or near daily sessions, and increased implementation time. Tier 3 continues to supplement the general education curriculum. This high leverage practice of systematically designed instruction is applicable across all tiers of instruction. Effective educators systematically sequence instruction by planning with essential understandings in mind. What do students need to learn? This backward design means that we know what our end goal is, and we provide sequenced instruction to get there. Systematically designed instruction begins with foundational understandings, builds understanding, confidence, and mastery, and then moves to more challenging aspects of content. Systematically designed instruction may need to be scaffolded for learner success. Scaffolded instruction supports students by providing temporary assistance through visual, verbal, and written supports to aid understanding and memory. We want students to experience productive struggle, not frustration or defeat. Effective teachers gradually remove supports as students move toward their learning targets. Systematically designed and scaffolded instruction is provided through large group, small group, and individual support. This high leverage practice supports the inclusion of students with disabilities in general education classrooms and also is essential when working in other settings as well. Systematically designed and scaffolded instruction is effective at home too. If you are a parent working with your own child, think about your end goal in mind and what you need to teach your child to enable him or her to be successful. For example, if your end goal is for your child to make his own breakfast, think about what subskills you need to teach first. Also, what temporary support does your child need to be successful? Perhaps a visual reminder on the refrigerator door or a chore chart. In order to systematically design instruction to meet student needs, you must consider learning objectives and your learner profile. If you are a teacher, review student records to identify whether the student has any processing deficits, such as in the areas of auditory sequencing, auditory memory, visual sequencing, visual memory, visual motor integration, or phonological processing. Also identify the student's executive functioning skills and whether the student is an English language learner. Then deliver content by building background knowledge and front-loading vocabulary. Provide explicit instruction and wait time for students to process information. The demands of the task may require that you break down content so students can meet objectives and goals. Finally, be mindful of individual student needs, their interests and personalities, and task demands when pairing or grouping students. If you are a parent, you already know your child and his or her needs. Think carefully about the skills needed to successfully complete a task, such as working independently on homework for 30 minutes. You may need to teach your child executive functioning skills such as checking his or her planner for assignments, setting a timer, reading directions carefully, and checking his or her homework for completeness and accuracy. As effective teachers systematically design instruction, they consider whether students need temporary support called a scaffold to help them successfully access and complete the task. Scaffolds are available in all settings, including the general education classroom. They provide support and a way for all students, including those with disabilities, to reach high standards. Scaffolds facilitate inclusion by helping students with disabilities succeed in general education classrooms. These are the different types of supports and scaffolds that should be utilized in Tier 1 instruction, which is the high quality instruction that all students in FCPS receive. These supports and scaffolds can be used for all students to reduce the barriers to accessing the content. A simple way of categorizing scaffolds is visual, verbal, and written supports. Some examples of visual scaffolds include pictures, word walls, mnemonics, and gestures. Verbal scaffolds include oral prompts or cues, think alouds, simplifying directions, and summarizing key points. Some examples of written scaffolds include cue cards, sentence frames or sentence starters, graphic organizers, and checklists. Please take a moment to read all of the examples of scaffolds provided in this chart. These are temporary supports that benefit all students, including those with disabilities. Utilizing these scaffolds promotes inclusion and success. Many of these temporary supports can be used by parents to support children at home as well. Visual scaffolds like charts with symbols provide support to children who need visual reminders to do things like making their bed, eating breakfast, and getting their backpack. Verbal scaffolds such as timers or simplified oral instructions can provide needed support for homework completion. Checklists can provide written support for tasks that need to be completed either before or after school. Technology like voice typing can provide support when children are trying to get their thoughts down on paper, whether it is a school essay or a letter to a grandparent. Now, please take a moment to think about putting this high leverage practice of scaffolding instruction into practice so that we can make a math class inclusive and accessible for all students. Assume you already have provided your instruction. In other words, you have done the I do part. Now your students will embark on the we do of guided practice. The question to ask yourself is, how can I adapt the curriculum task to make it more accessible for all students? Let's consider an example of a way to scaffold this third grade multiplication task taken from the FCPS program pacing guide. The wording of this task could be challenging. Specifically, the use of the word times could indicate the student had to use multiplication to solve this problem. This could lead to a student multiplying 20 times 5. How can we scaffold this task for a student who needs more simplified wording? This is an example of how you can use a temporary scaffold to support the learning around this type of word problem. The sentence stem and the 4 steps are examples of written scaffolds. Notice how the verbal scaffold of explaining thinking is utilized in step 2. These verbal and written scaffolds are temporary. Ultimately, the teacher will bring her students to the point where they can answer questions like the original math problem, which is more aligned with the wording on standardized tests. As we have seen, there are many supports and scaffolds we can temporarily provide as we adapt tasks to help students achieve learning goals. Sometimes a scaffold becomes an accommodation if needed for the long term. Accommodations may be specified in both 504 plans and IEPs. Once agreed upon by parents and school staff, accommodations are legally mandated instructional requirements to provide access for students with disabilities. After you have systematically designed instruction with the end goal and possible scaffolds in mind, it is time to consider the high leverage practice of adapting curriculum tasks and materials. All students are expected to make progress toward challenging and rigorous standards. Although many adaptations are designed to make content accessible to struggling learners, they all have the added benefit of improving outcomes for the full range of learners represented in today's classrooms. Adaptations may include the design of materials such as pictorial representations or videos to aid understanding, or providing specific supports such as computer-based writing tools. Some examples of accommodations include access to read aloud or online audio, calculators or math manipulatives, and shortened assignments. Some ways to adapt tasks are by giving students opportunities to demonstrate their understanding of content in a variety of ways beyond a traditional writing assignment, such as by completing a chart, developing a text-to-speech presentation, creating an outline or a poster, building a model or drawing a map. Another way to adapt tasks is to reduce the number of items students are expected to complete. For example, your student can receive the same math worksheet as the rest of the class, but you can ask him or her to complete only the odd numbered items. Another way to adapt a task is to assign a helper to model the steps of a task before the student performs them on his or her own. If you are a parent who is seeing your child struggle at home completing assignments, you may speak with your child's teachers about whether tasks may be adapted. Can he complete fewer math problems? Can she demonstrate her learning in an alternative way that still meets grade level expectations? Some ways to adapt materials are providing students with reading material based on their reading level that covers the same content. The teacher can provide reading materials at the student's instructional reading level during guided reading or the we do part of the lesson. During the you do or independent part of the lesson, the teacher can provide reading material that is at the student's independent reading level. Other ways to adapt curriculum materials include giving students enhanced texts in which key parts are highlighted, pictures or symbols are added, and or text is enlarged. In math, selecting concrete materials in addition to symbolic representations is another way to adapt curriculum materials. After systematically designing instruction, adapting curriculum tasks and materials, and considering temporary scaffolds, effective teachers provide explicit instruction to their students. Explicit instruction is a high leverage practice to teach an academic task or life skill by breaking it down into smaller pieces in order for students to learn. The gradual release of responsibility, also known as I do, we do, you do, during explicit instruction, is a teaching strategy that includes demonstration, prompt, and practice. At the beginning of a lesson or when new material is being introduced, the teacher plays a prominent role in delivery of the content. This is the I do phase of explicit instruction. New or complex content, skills, and concepts are made explicit by modeling. Then, as students acquire the new information and skills, the responsibility of learning shifts from teacher directed instruction to student processing activities. In the we do phase of explicit instruction, the teacher continues to model, question, prompt, and cue students. Students are given the opportunity to work with one another to problem solve, with ample time for productive perseverance to build capacity, with support, because ultimately our goal is for students to be able to complete these tasks independently. As students move into the you do phase of explicit instruction, they rely more on themselves and less on the teacher to complete the learning task. The gradual release of responsibility in the explicit instruction model promotes high level of success through differentiated support and structure for all students in inclusive classrooms. Explicit instruction also works at home. Parents can use the I do, we do, you do model for teaching children to become more independent in tasks such as making a bed, cleaning a room, washing clothes, or preparing meals. This is a graphic representation of the high leverage practice of explicit instruction. Teachers who implement this practice foster an inclusive classroom in which students can thrive. To be effective, teachers must strategically select and sequence the instruction of new skills, provide clear explanations and models, carefully guide student practice opportunities, and monitor student responses to provide immediate feedback. Again, explicit and systematic instruction works at home as well. Think about what you want to teach your child. Use clear language and demonstrate the skill. Work on the task with your child. Watch your child attempt the task independently and provide immediate feedback. Explicit instruction is systematic, direct, engaging, and success oriented. It promotes achievement for all students. This high leverage practice gives special and general education teachers the tools to implement explicit instruction in any grade level or content area. It also gives parents a framework for thinking about what needs to be taught, providing direct and clear instructions, engaging their children as partners in task completion, and then watching their children achieve success independently. During explicit instruction, effective teachers implement the high leverage practice of promoting active student engagement. In this graphic of the workshop model, you can see that the amount of time that students are engaged as active learners is about 2 to 3 times more than the direct instruction from the teacher. Explicit instruction by the teacher can continue during the work time periods with individuals or small groups of students. Active student engagement does not happen automatically, especially during online instruction. There are 3 prerequisites that need to be met to attain the high leverage practice of active student engagement. First, teachers must build positive teacher-student relationships. At home, parents who maintain positive relationships with their children are more likely to achieve success, whether getting their children to complete chores or homework. Second, teachers must use a variety of strategies to ensure student engagement in lessons. Class polls, think pair shares, reflections, and exit tickets are some ways to proactively engage students in their own learning. Third, teachers must actively monitor student engagement and provide ongoing specific feedback. Teachers can monitor student engagement by popping into virtual breakout rooms or circling around brick and mortar classrooms. Feedback can be oral, such as giving specific praise after students share their thinking, or written, such as teacher comments in Google Docs. We want to monitor students and provide feedback to encourage children and teens to actively engage in their own learning. Parents can promote student engagement by asking their children about something interesting they learned today, or even asking their children to teach parents something new. The final high leverage instruction practice we will review today is providing students with multiple opportunities for practice and feedback. We can guide student learning and behavior by providing them with opportunities for practice and feedback, which increases student engagement. There are multiple ways to provide students with feedback designed to motivate and encourage them to be independent learners. To increase effectiveness, feedback from both teachers and parents should be goal-directed and ongoing. Feedback can be verbal, nonverbal, or written, and it should be timely, genuine, and meaningful. Consider using I statements. For example, here's what I would do, or here's what worked best for me. You can also encourage your children to share their ideas by asking, what do you think you did well? Or have you considered trying it a different way? Researchers have identified key features that can either promote or impede learning. The first important feature of effective feedback is that it should be focused on the task or process, not the child. Please take a moment to read the non-example. Now, let's read the example of effective feedback. Notice how the example of effective feedback focused on Brendan's work and provides him with a strategy for successfully completing a task or process. Remembering to focus on the task and not the person is a great feedback strategy for parents and teachers alike and contributes to positive relationships. Research indicates that the next important feature of effective feedback is to provide immediate feedback, especially for struggling readers. Please take a moment to read the non-example. Now, let's read the example of effective feedback. Notice how in the example of effective feedback, the teacher monitors William's work and provides immediate verbal feedback on the steps William has followed correctly to begin solving the equation. Then the teacher guides William with next steps through a scaffolded question. If you are a parent noticing that your child is solving problems incorrectly, don't wait until all of the homework is completed inaccurately. Instead, provide immediate feedback on early problems to help your child successfully complete the remaining questions. Another important feature of effective feedback is that it should be explicitly goal directed. Please take a moment to read both the non-example and the example of goal-directed feedback. Notice that the example of goal-directed feedback provides the student with an explicit purpose. When we ask children to correct their work, it is important that we provide feedback that explicitly states the goal. This reduces frustration and sets up the student for success. Another important component of effective feedback is to focus on the student's misunderstandings rather than a lack of information. Please take a moment to read both the non-example and the example. In the example, the teacher provides specific information to the student about the errors and then reteaches the skill so the student can independently work on the rest of the items. Finally, researchers have found that effective feedback takes into account a student's developmental level and abilities. Telling a struggling student your answers are the shortest in class, you didn't write enough, isn't helpful. We don't want to shame children by comparing them to others. Please take a moment to read the example of effective feedback. Notice that the teacher in this example acknowledges that the assignment is challenging and explicitly states how she will work with the student to help him add more details to his writing. The student is likely to feel supported by this feedback rather than diminished. We want to set up children both at home and in the classroom for success by considering a student's developmental level and abilities when giving feedback. At home, we as parents need to be realistic about what our children, not their siblings or our neighbors, can do. When we are realistic about our children's developmental levels, then we can think about what specific feedback and support they need to achieve a goal. Please take a moment to reflect on your learning from today. Think about the knowledge you gained about high leverage instructional practices and ways to utilize them. What new instructional high leverage practices did you learn today that support the inclusion of individuals with disabilities? How would you implement these high leverage practices at home or in the classroom? Thank you for taking the time to learn about and reflect on high leverage instructional practices that support the inclusion of students with disabilities. If you would like more information on special education instruction for students who access the general education curriculum, please reach out to your regional points of contact in the Office of Special Education Instruction. Thank you.